Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Prepare to discover the mystery behind Crispus' death, the Roman monarch who died laughing. A murder? A strange disease? Find out. Subscribe and activate the bell so as not to miss anything. Imagine, for a moment, the year 326 after Christ. The Roman Empire, immense and powerful, but already showing cracks in his heart, Constantinople. The splendor of the imperial court shone there. In the midst of luxury and intrigue, Crispus lived, the eldest son of Emperor Constantine, a promising young man, an heir to the throne, a man with everything within his reach. But his life, full of promises, was going to truncate brutally and unexpectedly. His death, a mystery wrapped in shadows, is still a debate among historians. It was found dead, apparently murdered, in circumstances that only feed the speculation. Was it a palatial plot? A rivalry between brothers? Or maybe something more sinister? Historical sources offer different versions, but none offers completely satisfactory answers, leaving a veil of mystery about its tragic end. The speed with which Constantine acted after the discovery of Crispus' body, ordering a hurried investigation and summary executions, he only intensified the suspicions. Was he hiding something? Did he fear that the truth about the death of his son would reveal a darker truth about his own reign? History leaves us with more questions than answers, an intrigue that resonates through the centuries. The story of his death, so sudden, so violent, leaves us a sense of restlessness. But that splendor hid a much more complex reality. Think of barbarian invasions, a constant pressure on the borders of the empire. The Goths, the Huns, the Franks, they all pressed, looking for an entrance to the rich Roman lands. The army, once invincible, weakened, affected by corruption and lack of discipline. The legions, before a symbol of power, were now a shadow of their glorious past. The economy, which had been the engine of the empire for centuries, was also in crisis. Gallopant inflation made the value of money collapsed, generating social instability and discontent. Agricultural production was resented, and trade declined. The cities, formerly vibrant centers of activity, began to show signs of decline. As if that were not enough, the political structure of the empire itself staggered. The imperial succession was often violent and bloody, with emperors who died in palatial intrigues or on the battlefield. The administration was inefficient and corrupt, which aggravated the crisis in all areas. That in this context of instability and decline, the life of an individual, even that of an emperor, seemed fragile and unpredictable. But let's go back to that 4th century. Imagine the weight of the crown on Constantine's shoulders, a man who unified the empire after a bloody civil war. He, the architect of a new era, also faced the dilemmas of paternity. How to educate an heir in the midst of political chaos and palatial conspiracies. His son, Crispus, was his hope, his designated successor, raised in imperial purple, surrounded by luxuries and power. Crispus, a brilliant and capable young man, proved to be an excellent military strategist. He became a fundamental pillar for his father, participating in crucial military campaigns and winning the respect of the legions. His skill on the battlefield and his charisma made him an admired public figure, but also a potential rival for other members of the imperial court. The relationship between father and son, however, was not exempt from tensions. The ambition, the palatial intrigues and the suspicions planted by the enemies of Constantine created an atmosphere of distrust. Accusations of insubordination and betrayal, possibly unfounded, poisoned the relationship, leading to a fatal decision by the emperor. Remember that Constantine, despite his greatness, was a man of his time, a time marked by cruelty and ruthless politics. The execution of Crispus, despite being a terrible act, was the result of these complex power dynamics, an example of the price paid at the top of the Roman Empire. But Constantine had a son, Crispus. Imagine a brilliant young man, a victorious general, legitimate heir of the empire. Crispus was the favorite. His father's right arm in the most important battles. You see it there, riding at the head of the legions, their armor shining under the sun, the firm and determined look. His bravery on the battlefield was legendary. His victories resonated throughout the empire. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. Think of the military campaigns in which he participated. His victories consolidated Constantine's power, expanding the borders of the empire and ensuring peace. He was the young hero, the symbol of the new order. The natural heir to it was the image of the future of the Roman Empire, a promising future under its leadership. You are witnessing his rise, his glory, of the admiration he woke up throughout the army. Crispo was not only a great military strategist, he was also a capable administrator. His intelligence and his ability to govern were evident, with his father by his side. He learned to manage the vast territory of the empire, to deal with the complex administration, to maintain inner peace. You see it there, in an imperial advice scene, surrounded by senators and counselors, their penetrating gaze, analyzing reports and dictating orders with authority. But let's go back to Crispo. You imagine it, right? An imposing young man, riding at the head of his legions, the sun shining on his armor. His military victories were legendary. From a young age, he demonstrated an innate ability to command, a brilliant strategy that led him to conquer territories and crush rebellions. His triumphs not only strengthened the empire, but also consolidated their own position within it. His military feats did not go unnoticed. His name resonated in every corner of the empire, synonymous with courage and success. Each battle won, each conquered territory raised its status, not only as a general, but also as a political figure. People admired him, the soldiers followed him blindly, and his influence grew exponentially with each victory. His political power grew in parallel to his military influence. Constantine, his father, saw him as a natural heir, a successor capable of maintaining the unity and greatness of the empire. Crispo became a nearby counselor, participating in the most important political decisions, influencing the administration of the empire and internal policy. His rise was unstoppable, a meteoric path to absolute power. His victories made him a hero, a man whom people looked with admiration and respect. But you wonder, was it just a brilliant general or something else? His ascent was meteoric, too fast for some. He began to accumulate power, influence, and the loyalty of his troops, an army that followed him blindly. Did Crispo look like the future emperor? The question looms about his figure, a shadow that grows with each triumph. The imperial court, with its intricate network of intrigues and conspiracies, cautiously observed its growth. Constant, tireless, Crispo was consolidated as a powerful figure, capable of challenging even Emperor Constantine. Was it legitimate ambition or an insatiable thirst for power? Up to you. Each victory, every sample of loyalty of its soldiers, brought it closer to the throne, although no one said it openly. Perhaps he did not seek the throne openly, but his aura of power was undeniable. People commented, the rumors flew, and Constantine, his own father, could not ignore the growing shadow of his son. It was a dilemma for the emperor. A brilliant heir, or a dangerous rival? The answer, as we will see, would have fatal consequences. The future of Rome hitting a thread, woven with the ambition of a young general. But his ascent was not only his. Behind Crispo, the figure of Fausta, his mother, the empress, rose. A woman of legendary beauty, yes, but also of an excessive ambition and, some say, of ruthless cruelty. You will wonder, what role did she play in the brilliant rise of her son? Did he drive it, or simply benefited from his success? Some historians paint her as a manipulative woman, who wove a network of intrigues to ensure the power of her family. Others, on the other hand, defend her, arguing that she was a victim of the circumstances, a woman trapped in the brutal power game of the Roman Empire. The truth, as is usually the case, is probably at some intermediate point. What is true is that the relationship between Fausta and Constantine, her husband and emperor, was complex and often turbulent. Jealousy, rivalries, and perhaps even betrayals marked their marriage. And in the midst of all this, Crispo, the brilliant and ambitious son, became a key piece in this intricate political board. But Fausta's ambition was not the only threat to Crispo. His relationship with his father, Constantine, was a complex tapestry fabric with threads of love, pride, and, finally, a deep distrust. You know that Constantine was a man of relentless decisions, an emperor who had come to power through blood and war, and Crispo, his designated heir, was a reflection of his own military force, a successful and respected young general. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. However, that same force, that same independence, began to sow the seed of doubt in the heart of Constantine. Was Crispo a threat? His popularity eclipsed that of the emperor? The intrigues of the court, are a culture broth for rumors and accusations, and Constantine, despite its strength, was vulnerable to murmuring. The shadow of suspicion began to grow between father and son. The situation became even more complex with the accusations of incest against Crispo, accusations that, although never completely proven, sowed the definitive discord between father and son. It was a terrible decision. A death sentence disguised as justice. Constantine, driven by intrigue and fear of losing control, condemned his own son, a tragic end for an heir that, once, had been the promise of a solid and lasting empire. The Roman court was a hotbed of rumors. You know how those things are, right? A whisper here, a furtive look there, and suddenly, the most innocent indiscretion became an imperial conspiracy. There was talk of hidden enmity, excessive ambitions, of palatial intrigues that would leave you ice cream. The shadow of distrust of everyone, even on Constantine himself. The accusations against Crispo began to circulate as a virus. It was said that he conspired against his father, that he plotted a rebellion, that he intended the throne. I imagine that those words should have frozen your blood. But remember that in the Roman court, the truth and the lie were mixed with a very hard ease. The truth often was the first victim. Fausta, the empress, with her beauty and excessive ambition, became a central figure in these machinations. It was said that she had orchestrated the fall of Crispo, feeding the rumors and sowing discord. Maybe she was poisoning Constantine's ear. Or perhaps he was just one more victim of the intricate power networks who wove life in court, but who wanted to see Crispo outside the board. Start with its stepmother, Fausta. You know, the wife of Emperor Constantine. She, with her ambitions and possible lovers, saw Crispo as an obstacle on her way to power, a popular young man, a possible heir, a threat too big to ignore. His whispers, as silent as mortal, slid down the halls of the palace, poisoning the imperial mind. Then there were the courtiers, those vultures always hungry for power. Many saw in the fall of Crispo an opportunity to ascend, to win favor with the emperor. Intrigues, gossip, false accusations, everything was part of his mortal game. They, with their sharp tongues as daggers, wove a network of lies around the young prince. And we cannot forget Constantine's political enemies. For them, Crispo was a pawn in his power game. If they could destabilize the emperor, eliminating his heir, they could perhaps take advantage of the situation to achieve their own objectives. His plans, hidden after a facade of loyalty, were as dangerous as their ambition. So, while Crispo laughed, many plotted their downfall. But Fausta did not act alone. The accusation against Crispo was brutal. Betrayal of the empire. It was said that he conspired against his own father, Constantine, urging a plot to snatch his power. Imagine the magnitude of the accusation, the severity of the consequences. And there did not end everything. The other part of the accusation was even more scandalous. Incest with his stepmother, Fausta. A crime that broke not only the laws of the empire, but also the most sacred moral taboos of the time. The idea that the emperor's son maintained a relationship with his father's wife was something unimaginable, something that undermined the morale of the empire. You will ask yourself, how could Constantine, such a powerful emperor, believe these terrible accusations? Perhaps Fausta's ambition, his influence on the court, and the pressure of Crispo's enemies managed to convince him. Or perhaps Constantine, blinded by pain and betrayal, simply preferred to believe what suited him. Imagine Crispo, Constantine's son, accused of betrayal at a trial, but not a fair and equitable one like you could wait. It was a summary process, fast and without the guarantees that any citizen, even in Rome then, should have. The shadow of suspicion, amplified by the palatial intrigues, hovered on it. There was no real debate, nor the opportunity to defend himself properly. Fausta's accusations and his allies, possibly exaggerated or even invented, weighed more than any test in his favor. Power, excessive ambition, decided the fate of Crispo without contemplation. Think of injustice. A man of his position, accused of such a serious crime, without the right to a fair trial. The decisions were made in the halls of power, far from the courts, in the midst of intrigues and secrets that will probably be completely revealed. His destiny was sealed even before the trial began. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. So there was Crispo, facing the terrible reality, the accusation of betrayal, as absurd as lethal, had weighed more than any defense. There was no opportunity for witnesses, or for real investigation. The trial was a farce, a pantomime designed to condemn him. The sentence fell like an invisible guillotine. Death, the emperor, his own father, had signed his destiny. Imagine the scene. An opulent palace, the coldness of the marble contrasting with the heat of the conviction. There was no appeal or clemency. The decision was taken, death, without redemption, perhaps an instant of disbelief, of denial, before the terrible truth settled in his heart. His life, until that moment full of privileges and power, was reduced to a moment, to a simple sentence. The death sentence was not a simple procedure. It was a message, a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the power of the emperor. It was the brutal demonstration that even a child, an heir, was not safe from imperial anger. For you, history reveals the coldness of politics, the cruelty of power, and the fragility of life, even at the top of the Roman Empire. He didn't even have time for a last sentence. The impassive executioners approached, and I imagine the coldness of steel, the weight of fate falling on it. At a moment, a shadow, and then silence. The speed of execution sought to avoid any sample of mercy, or worse, a possible popular revolt. Crispus, the emperor's son, had been eliminated with the same efficiency with which the head is cut to a weed. It is said that even in his last moments, Crispus maintained a dignified posture, although life escaped with each heartbeat. There were no regrets or supplications. Only the cold acceptance of an unfair death. A brutal death, yes, but also fast, that saved him the agony of a prolonged conviction. Remember that history is sometimes cruel in its efficiency. Crispus's execution was an abrupt end point to a life full of promises and truncated by his father's paranoia. At a brutal ending, without a doubt, but also tells us about the fragility of power, and how even the most privileged can fall victims of intrigue and injustice. Can you imagine the scene? The sepulchral silence after the blow, the inert body of a man who one day had everything. Silence. Only the echo of the fall. Justice. Constancio, your father, justified it as a need for state, a conspiracy that threatened the empire. But you, what do you think? A conspiracy orchestrated by ambition, or an impulsive young man who was involved in something bigger than him? Crispus's letters, intercepted, talked about betrayal, secret alliances, but were they true or a manipulation of the court? The official version speaks of a plot to overthrow Constantius, a conspiracy that involved Crispus's own mother, Fausta. A terrible accusation, as serious as the penalty imposed. But was Crispus really guilty? Or was he a victim of palatial intrigues, a sacrifice to consolidate his father's power? History has been in charge of feeding doubt. Some historians suggest that Crispus's execution was an act of cruelty, a political murder to eliminate a possible rival. Others maintain the official version, presenting Crispus as a traitor who deserved his punishment. The truth, as usually happens, remains hidden after the veil of time and the interpretation of the facts. You, what do you think? But the story, as usual, has several faces. Constancio, your father, attributed Crispus's death to an alleged conspiracy. He spoke of betrayal, of a threat to the empire, of dark secrets that Crispus hid. An official version, imposed with the weight of imperial power. But was it the complete truth? Other voices, whispers between the court, spoke of a rivalry between father and son, excessive ambitions, and a fearful emperor of his own heir. It was said that Crispus, popular among the army, represented a threat to the reign of Constantium. A struggle for the power disguised as conspiracy? It was even murmuring of a possible love intrigue, of a rivalry between Constancio and her son for the affection of Fausta, the empress. A love triangle that, according to some, caused the wrath of the emperor and the fatal decision. Jealousy, passion, and power intertwined in a tragic outcome? The truth is that the death of Crispus, surrounded by mystery and contradictions, never had a unique, definitive explanation. Each version, every whisper, adds one more dark layer to this historical enigma. And you, what do you think it really happened? But was it really a threat? Constancio, in his pain and paranoia, did he get carried away by palatial intrigues? Some historians point to a conspiracy, perhaps urged by enemies of Crispus, powerful characters who saw in him an obstacle to their ambitions. Imagine the Roman court, a hotbed of gossip, hidden alliances, and betrayals in the light of the torches. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. Perhaps the accusation of betrayal was a pretext, an excuse to get rid of a political rival. Think of the rivalry between factions, the excessive power of some generals and the ambition unleashed by the control of the empire. Was Constancio took advantage of a situation to eliminate his stepson, a possible heir to the throne that took his sleep? The speed with which the sentence was executed without a fair trial feeds the theories of a plot. Were there irrefutable evidence against Crispo, or was it a summary execution, driven by fear or revenge? Historical sources are contradictory, leaving a halo of mystery about the true motivations behind the death of the young general. You can reach your own conclusions yourself. The truth, buried under the weight of the centuries, is still an enigma. Was it a palatial plot, a political strategy, or simply a family tragedy? The mystery of Crispo's death remains, a reminder of power, ambition, and darkness that reigned in the Roman court. The news of Crispo's death hit Constantine as a ray. His son, his heir, dead, the emperor, known for his implacable control, plunged into a sea of confusion and pain. That I imagine the scene. Constantine's face, usually serene, now contorted by penalty and disbelief. How could it be possible? The versions about their reaction are contradictory. Some say Constantine collapsed, unable to accept the loss. Others speak of a devastating fury, a blind anger that led him to a deep investigation to find the culprits. The truth, as is usually the case, hides in the shadows of history. What we do know is that Crispo's death marked a turning point in Constantine's reign. The shadow of the doubt, the suspicion of betrayal Cernia over the court. Trust, so carefully constructed, cracks. For you, what really happened in the emperor's mind after the death of his son? Crispo's death was not just a personal blow to Constantine. He shook the foundations of the empire. His son was a fundamental pillar of the army, a respected leader and loved by the troops. His sudden disappearance left a void of power that many would take advantage of. Imagine the uncertainty that the soldiers seized, the confusion between the officers and the speculation that ran like gunpowder among the population. Political stability, already fragile, staggered. The palatial intrigues, always present, intensified. Constantine's enemies saw in Crispo's death an opportunity to challenge his authority. Think of the possible conspiracies, the rumors of betrayal and the secret alliances that should have weaved in the shadow. Economically, Crispo's death also had consequences. Crispo was key in the administration of vast regions of the empire. Its absence meant a tax collection disorder, provinces management, and the control of commercial routes. There should be an immediate impact on the economy, an instability that was reflected in the daily life of many. In summary, Crispo's death, although it seems a personal event, had a devastating impact on the Roman Empire. From military and political destabilization to economic consequences. His death precipitated a crisis that Constantine had to face. All his power and cunning. It was a blow that resonated in every corner of the vast empire. But what role did Fausta play in all this? Constantine's wife, a woman of great influence in court, was known for her beauty and ambition. Some historians point to a rivalry between Fausta and Crispo, perhaps for the favor of the emperor or for the influence that the young general exerted in the army. Imagine the tension in the imperial court, the palatial intrigues, the whispers and the runners. Could Fausta have seen in the death of Crispo an opportunity to consolidate its own power? Historical sources are contradictory, of course. Some stories suggest a conspiracy orchestrated by Fausta, perhaps motivated by jealousy or the threat Crispo represented for their own children. Others, however, present it as a victim of circumstances, manipulated by other courtiers with their own hidden interests. Think about the complexity of power in Rome, in how alliances and betrayals were constantly intertwined. Be that as it may, Fausta's involvement in the death of Crispo, real or perceived, had devastating consequences. His role, although uncertain, contributed to a climate of distrust and paranoia in the imperial court. The shadow of suspicion about her was forever, a mystery that has intrigued historians and history fans for centuries. Was Fausta a villain, a victim, or something between the two things? Prosody. Speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Let's go back to Crispo. Son of Constantine, heir to the throne. His life was marked by ambition and war. From a young age, important military responsibilities were entrusted, demonstrating an innate talent for leadership. Imagine battles, victories, the roar of the crowd celebrating his triumphs. He was his father's right arm, a respected general and feared in equal parts. But that same military brilliance, that same popularity, sowed the seed of distrust in court. His meteoric ascent, his proximity to the emperor, generated envy and conspiracies. Some saw him as a threat, a rival too powerful. Think of the palatial intrigues, in the whispers in the halls, in the glances of the sussage. The imperial court was a snake nest, where loyalty was a luxury and betrayal, a currency of exchange. Constantine, despite his filial love, was not immune to manipulations. Accusations of betrayal, conspiracies, rumors, everyone pointed to Crispo. Perhaps he was the victim of a discredit campaign orchestrated by his enemies. Perhaps the excessive ambition of some clouded the emperor's trial. Whatever the truth, Crispo's life went out abruptly, leaving behind a legacy of mystery and controversy that lasts to this day. A tragic end for a man who promised a lot. But who really was Crispo? An ambitious general thirsty for power, or an innocent young man caught in the intrigues of the imperial court? Historical sources present us a contradictory image. Some paint it as a brilliant, capable and brave military leader, with an insatiable thirst for glory. Others, on the other hand, describe him as a noble man, loyal to his father, victim of palatial envies. His ambition, if he had it, was it a simple search for recognition for his military achievements? Or a real threat to the throne of his father? It is difficult to discern it with certainty. The accusations against him of conspiracy and betrayal were made by his enemies, powerful figures that saw in him an obstacle in their own power games. Were those certain accusations, or a manipulation to get rid of a rival? The truth is probably at some intermediate point. It is possible that Crispo was an ambitious man, but also a loyal man to his family and his empire. Perhaps his ambition was not evil, but the natural result of his talent and position. The question is, was it his ambition, real or perceived, which led him to his tragic end? But what happened to his memory after his tragic death? The story of Crispo, despite his brief but intense life, became an echo off in the annals of the empire. His figure, wrapped in mystery and controversy, was fading over the centuries, eclipsed by the most powerful and longevous figures of the time. You could ask yourself, was it completely forgotten? The answer is complex. Some historians consider him a victim of palatial machinations, a young general with a brilliant future truncated by the envy and ambition of his rivals. Others, on the other hand, see him as an ambiguous character, perhaps too ambitious for his own convenience, leaving a legacy overshadowed by doubts about his true nature. Its history, therefore, has become a historical enigma that continues to challenge interpretations. However, his name has not completely disappeared. Despite the lack of great monuments or public celebrations in his honor, the figure of Crispo continues to appear in historical studies, novels and works of art, remembering his tragic story in each mention. Even if it is brief, the question is kept alive. Was Crispo a forgotten hero, or simply a minor figure in the complex history of the Roman Empire? But how do we know all this? Information about Crispo's death comes to us through fragmented sources and sometimes contradictory. One of the most important is Eusebio de Caesarea, a Christian historian of the 4th century. He, in his works, mentions the execution of Crispo, although he does not offer such graphic details as other later authors. His perspective, died for his faith, gives us a particular vision of the facts. Other sources, such as imperial panegyric or chronicles of later emperors, also refer to Crispo, but often superficially or even biased. Remember that history, especially imperial history, is full of propaganda and manipulation. Each author had their own motivations to tell the story of Crispo, and that affects the information that comes to us. Therefore, rebuilding the truth about Crispo's death is a complex puzzle. You have to analyze the different sources, comparing them and contrasting them to try to obtain a more complete vision. It is a detective research process, where each track, every fragment of information, is crucial to approach the truth, even if it is a partial and rebuilt truth. /prosody, s/speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. Eusebio, for example, wrote decades after the events. Imagine trying to rebuild a puzzle with broken pieces and some completely lost. He, like many other historians of the time, depended on rumors, personal letters, and perhaps even biased interpretations of events. How reliable is that information for you? Political part also plays a crucial role. Remember that historical sources are not neutral. The emperors, like Constantine, could influence the narrative to favor their own image or that of their allies, or to discredit their enemies. In the case of Crispo, who benefited from a version of the facts that presented it as a traitor. Therefore, when we talk about Crispo's death, we are not facing a definitive truth, but before a complex network of interpretations. You must analyze the sources with a critical eye, recognize their limitations and biases. What other motivations could have hidden the true causes of his death? What information has been lost irremediably? So, returning to Crispo, what do chronicles really say about their death? The truth is that, as I already told you, there are contradictions. Eusebio, for example, speaks of a palatial conspiracy, intrigues and accusations of incest. A dramatic story, full of secrets and betrayals, which paints Crispo as a victim of an excessive ambition. Other historians, however, offer different versions. Some minimize the importance of accusations, suggesting that the political rivalry between Constancio and Fausta, Constantine's wife, was the main engine of the tragic outcome. For them, Crispo was simply a piece in a much larger power game. The lack of forceful evidence and the contradictory nature of the sources make the task of establishing a definitive version difficult. Was it a summary execution? An undercover murder? Or perhaps, as some theories suggest, an accidental death that became an excuse to eliminate a possible political rival? The chronicles, despite their attempts, fail to clarify the whole mystery. But was it really a conspiracy? Eusebio, a Christian chronicler, painted a dark painting, suggesting that Constancio, Crispo's father, eliminated him to protect his own political ambition. There is talk of palatial intrigues, accusations of incest with its stepmother Fausta, accusations that, although not proven, feed the theory of strategic elimination. Other historians, however, prefer the hypothesis of a tragedy. Perhaps Crispo, an ambitious and powerful young man, was involved in a dangerous rivalry with his half-brother Constantine II. A rivalry that, far from being an orchestrated conspiracy, could have resulted in a fatal conflict, perhaps even in a duel to death. The lack of overwhelming evidence leaves us in an uncertain field. Was it a cold and calculated execution, or a fatal outcome of faced ambitions? The smile that, according to the legend, Crispo took when he died, adds one more layer of mystery. A smile of resignation, contempt, or perhaps of ironic triumph, given the futility of imperial politics. But Eusebio's version leaves a question in the air, one that resonates through the centuries. Crispo died laughing? The chronicles, although they differ in the details of their death, mention something strange, something that has become part of the mystery surrounding its end. Some historians, based on ancient stories, claim that their last breath was exhaled in the middle of a laughter. Imagine the scene, the opulence of the Roman Empire contrasting with the grotesque irony of a prince dying. Between laughter. Of course, one might think that it is just a legend, a fantasy addition to make the story more memorable. But the persistence of this detail through different sources raises questions. Could such an unusual death be simply an invention? Or is there anything deeper? A hidden key in that final laugh that tells us about the complex truth behind his murder? Perhaps that laugh was not a sign of joy, but a reflection of agony, an involuntary reaction of the body to the poison. Or maybe, and this is the most intriguing, that laugh was an expression of the irony of the situation. The heir of the empire, victim of the same palatial intrigues that he had witnessed since childhood. A bitter laugh, full of disappointment and a last sigh of disbelief. But what really happened? The official history, driven by Constantium II, pointed to a conspiracy, a plot made of the excessive ambition. There was talk of betrayal, of palatial intrigues, of hidden enemies that sought power. For Constancio, eliminating Crispo was necessary to ensure his own reign. He himself, the father who had executed him, was the one who wove this narrative. Prosody, speak. Speak, the prosody rate equals 90%. However, other theories arose over the centuries. Some historians suggest that Crispo's death was an unfortunate accident, perhaps a result of power struggles within the imperial court. Imagine an environment full of tension, hidden rivalries between noble and ambitious generals, where a simple dispute could trigger fatal consequences. Another hypothesis, perhaps the most intriguing, proposes that Crispo's laughter before he died was the product of a slow-action poison, which caused an ironic euphoria before causing death. Think about the image. An emperor falling prey to an uncontrollable laugh, while darkness looms on him. A strange, ironic death, and full of mystery. So, although the official story leans towards an execution by betrayal, the doubt remains: was it a plot, an accident, or a masked murder with a subtle poison? The truth, like Crispus' laugh, vanishes in the mystery of history, leaving the task of continuing to look for answers. But the story of Crispus does not end in the intrigues of the court. His image, despite the official conviction, endures through art. Think of the imposing statues, the marble busts that even today tell us about their past. Can you imagine the expression of his face, the gravity in his eyes, recorded for eternity in cold stone? Note how the sculptors, with their chisels, tried to capture their essence. Not only his physique, but also the strength of his personality, the weight of his position. A young heir to the empire, a victorious general. How many silent stories are hidden in every detail of those sculptures? Beyond the monumental statues, look for the most intimate representations. Small cameos, medallions with their image, personal objects, perhaps gifted, perhaps made in their memory. Each of them a small window to his life, to his time. Tiny details that allow us to rebuild a part of its history. But what about that strange representation of his death? It is said that Crispus died laughing. Imagine the scene. A powerful man, heir to the empire, finding his end in a laugh. A mockery of death itself. A gesture of final challenge to your enemies? The image is as shocking as disturbing. A mystery that has fed legends for centuries. Was it really like that? Or is it a subsequent interpretation, perhaps a way of mitigating the brutality of its execution? That laugh, if it existed, has become a symbol. A symbol of the irony of life, of ephemeral power, of how fortune can change in an instant. For some, it is an ironic end, a last act of rebellion against those who betrayed him. For others, a macabre omen, a curse that chases those who dare to challenge the imperial destiny. Think about it. The image of an emperor or future emperor, dying with an expression of laughter on his face. What does that laugh mean? Contempt? Challenge? Or maybe something deeper, a mystery that resists being unraveled? History leaves us with this image, this unknown, and invites us to reflect on the meaning of laughter, death, and power in the turbulent Roman Empire. But have you wondered how this image has arrived, this peculiar anecdote, to this day? The death of Crispus, that end between laughs, has inspired numerous authors and filmmakers. Imagine the narrative possibilities. An unsolved mystery, a palatial conspiracy, the fall of a hero, an explosive cocktail for a good historical novel. Think of the historical novels that could arise from its history. At a charismatic main character, wrapped in political intrigues, with such an unexpected end, an accidental death, a carefully planned murder. The possibilities are endless, and many authors have undoubtedly explored these alternatives in their works, recreating the atmosphere of the Roman court and the life of Crispus. And speaking of recreations, can you imagine an epic film set at the time of the late Roman Empire with Crispus as the protagonist? Battle scenes, palatial intrigues, luxury and decline. A film adaptation of his life and death could be a real success. Don't you think? It could show the opulence of the empire, power struggles, and, of course, that enigmatic end. But Crispus' death did not stay in a simple anecdote. Its execution, wrapped in mystery and rumors, generated deep instability in the empire. Imagine the impact. A son of the emperor, potential heir, eliminated so abruptly. This sowed doubt, distrust, and fear between the court and the people. The history of his death, told and recalled through the centuries, became a symbol of the fragility of power and cruelty of imperial politics. /prosody, /speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Crispus' death became a key element to understand the complex dynamic of the late Roman Empire. Analysts and historians have studied it for centuries, seeking to understand the motivations behind its execution and its impact on Constantine's reign. His tragic death, far from being forgotten, has been woven in historical narrative as an example of the struggles for power and the consequences of political decisions. Even today, Crispus' story continues to resonate. His death, wrapped in mystery and speculation, continues to inspire historical debates and feeds the fascination for the time. It is a reminder that history, even the most tragic, can have an echo that lasts over time, influencing our understanding of the past and, perhaps, even in our present. Think in other cases of political murders in Rome. The elimination of rivals, even within the imperial family itself, was common. But Crispo's death was different. There was talk of poison, palatial intrigues, accusations of betrayal, but was it really guilty? The speed with which the sentence was executed, without a fair trial, raised suspicions among citizens. Remember the fall of many emperors, surrounded by conspiracies and murders. But the execution of a son of the emperor, an apparent heir, was an unprecedented sign of instability. Can you imagine the fear and uncertainty that took over the imperial court? The murder of Crispo was not a simple adjustment of accounts, but a key piece in the complex game of power of the time. Comparing it with other murders, such as Caligula or Nero, Crispo's death stands out for his brutality and lack of public justification. In those cases, there were at least official versions, although manipulated, about the reasons for the crime. With Crispo, the mystery remained, feeding speculations and theories for centuries. His death marked a turning point, a moment of rupture in the stability of the empire. Crispo's death reveals the harsh reality of power in Rome. It was not only a matter of military force or political influence, but also of a complex network of ambitions and betrayals. Think of the veracity with which Constantine, your emperor, protected his throne, even at the expense of his own son. What tells you that about the nature of absolute power? Ambition, that insatiable thirst for more power, is a fundamental engine in history. In the case of Crispo, he speculates with his possible rivalry with his half-brother Constancio. Can you imagine the tension in the imperial court? That silent fight for the emperor's favor, a fight that is often fought in the shadows and ends in tragedy. And finally, betrayal. That stab on the back, that word whispered to the emperor's ear, capable of destroying reputations and lives. Crispo's death was not a simple murder. It was the result of a complex plot of palatial intrigues. Someone, or several, approached Constantine with accusations against their child, sowing doubt in their mind and manipulating their decisions. Who could have been capable of such an act? So there you have it, the story of Crispo, an enigma wrapped in mystery. His death, so sudden and apparently absurd, leaves us with more questions than answers. Was Constantino really responsible? Historical sources are contradictory, full of propaganda and biases. Sometimes, the truth is hidden behind a curtain of rumors and speculation, and in the case of Crispo, that curtain is exceptionally dense. Think about it. An heir to the throne, powerful and ambitious, eliminated in such strange circumstances. Was it a conspiracy? A simple whim of a paranoid emperor? Maybe we never know for certainty. What we do know is that Crispo's death serves as a chilling reminder of the fragility of power and instability of the Roman Empire on its sunset. Crispo's story leaves us with a disturbing feeling, a feeling that there are pieces that are missing in the puzzle. Perhaps the truth is in the silences, in what is not said, in the shadows that surround this tragic final. And it is precisely that uncertainty, that mystery that persists through the centuries, which makes Crispo's story into a fascinating and terrifying lesson in history. So was the head of the head? That is the question we all ask ourselves. Ancient sources, although contradictory, point to a palatial conspiracy. Some say that Constantine, concerned about Crispo's growing popularity, ordered his execution to ensure his own power. Others, however, defend the innocence of the emperor, suggesting that Crispo was the victim of courteous intrigues. The accusation of incest, right, or political invention, that is another key piece of puzzle. If it was true, who orchestrated her? Was it a strategy to discredit Crispo and eliminate a threat to the throne? If it was false, who benefited from lies? The lack of overwhelming evidence leaves the door open to multiple interpretations, feeding speculation for centuries. Prosody, speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%, and death itself. Really laughing? The chronicles speak of a sudden, violent death, and yes, some ancient authors mention that Crispo died laughing. It is speculated on poisoning, perhaps a form of rapid and discreet murder, which could have caused a peculiar facial expression in its last moments. Was it a macabre coincidence, or an added detail to emphasize the inexplicable of its end? But what is Crispo? His death, wrapped in mystery and tragedy, marked a turning point in the reign of Constantine. Despite his short life, Crispo left an indelible mark on history, although not the one he would have desired. His image, idealized in the currencies and sculptures that still last, tells us about a young promising emperor, an heir prepared to govern. However, The shadow of the palatial conspiracy and the excessive ambition reached it, burying its potential. His legacy, although truncated, invites us to reflect on the power, intrigue, and fragility of life in the high spheres of the empire. His premature death serves as a warning about the consequences of excessive ambition and betrayal. What would have happened if Crispo had reigned? That is a question that will resonate in history forever, a mystery that feeds the fascination that still awakens the figure of the young emperor. The irony of his death, such an unexpected and grotesque ending, only adds more intrigue to its history. His legacy is not only that of a fallen emperor, but also that of a historical enigma that continues to fascinate historians and fans of Roman history. You, as a spectator, can form your own opinion about his life and death, based on the clues that history has left us. Crispo's story reminds us that even in the context of imperial power, life can be surprisingly fragile, and destiny, often, unpredictable. Imagine, for a moment, Crispo's face, a young general, brilliant, loved by his troops. Now, think of his last image, perhaps not agony, but perhaps of an ironic smile, a final gesture before the incomprehensible cruelty of destiny. His life, a meteoric ascent, truncated abruptly. What is left of your legacy? Does your memory persist only in the shadows of imperial history? History remembers him as a victim, but also as a man of action. Think of his courage on the battlefield, his loyalty to his father, Emperor Constantine. Despite his premature death, his figure remains in collective memory, a symbol of ambition, talent, and, of course, a tragedy that still resonates in the annals of Roman history. Perhaps, Crispo's death serves as a lesson about the fragility of life and power, a reminder that even the most powerful can fall before intrigue and ambition. Its history invites us to reflect on the ephemeral nature of power and the importance of assessing every moment. What would you do if you were in place? I hope you enjoyed Crispo's story. If you liked it, give like and subscribe for more. What do you think about its mysterious end? Leave it in comments. /prosody/speak